This begins CD number 3.
The 31st chapter of the Quran is called Luqman, and it's a Meccan surah, which means that it was revealed during the first 13 years. So any Meccan chapter doesn't necessarily mean it was revealed in Mecca. It could have been revealed in Medina or in other parts of the peninsula. So when you say Meccan, it means it was prior to Hijrah. All right, so this was prior to Hijrah, and it's important because the rules obviously change. Things change when the Prophet ﷺ moves from Mecca to Medina, and so it's one of the most important things about chapters and verses to know whether they're Meccan or whether they're Medinan or Mekki or Medini. Luqman, there's a different opinion about who he was, but some of the Mufassirun say that he was Aesop, who's known in the Western tradition for his fables, particularly about animals, Aesop's fables. And Aesop, it's something in this culture that you read your children, and they're actually very wise stories, and they usually have a moral at the end. So it'll say the moral of the story. Aesop would always tell the moral. And the idea of stories as being sources of morality is as ancient as humans have been telling stories, because the purpose of a story was always to have some type of moral resolution. And one of the things about modern stories is they don't have moral resolutions. So what you're dealing with is nihilism, which is the idea that there are no absolute values in the world, that everything's relative. So you'll have stories, modern stories, where the criminals are actually the heroes of the stories, and the criminals will actually be the ones that benefit at the end of the story. Traditionally, that was never acceptable. In melodrama, you had a resolution of good overcoming evil, and in tragedy, you had the idea of moral ambiguity, that a tragic hero had a flaw. Usually in Greek tradition it was called hubris, which was overweening pride, and that hubris would cause that tragic hero to have a downfall. But there was always a moral, and the moral was that pride will destroy you. So if you look at, for instance, Shakespeare is constantly teaching in his tragedies ethics, but he teaches it through negative example. He shows you what doing bad will do, or what moral flaws, the effect that they'll have on your life. So the Quran says that we tell you the best stories, ahsan al-qasas, and the stories are always about those who stand with the truth and those who stand against the truth. And if you're standing for neither, then according to the Quranic worldview, you're basically against the truth, because you have to take a position in life. It's the nature of life. You have to take a position. You can't sit on the fence. That we're in an ethical world and there are choices, and the choice that you make is going to determine the outcome of your life, but also the outcome of your next life. And choice is centered in the heart. It's not necessarily an action. It can actually be a position that you take in your heart. So you might not actually have to do anything, but your heart has to be with the truth. And that is exemplified in people that are oppressed and have no power to change their condition, but they have a power to change how they respond to their conditions internally. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ said: if you see wrong and you can't change it, you have to still reject it in your heart. And he said, and there's no faith after that you don't have any iman. So Luqman is one of the stories we're told in the Quran. Whether he was Aesop or not it's not definitive, but that is one position. Some say he was a freed slave from Abyssinia. Some say that he was a king. I mean, there's different versions, but the important thing is that he was given wisdom, and that's what we're being told. It begins Alif Lam Mim, like the beginning of Baqarah, and the Huruf al-Muqatta'a, which is what they're called. These are letters that we don't know what they mean. That's always struck me as one of the most powerful proofs of the Quran, is the fact that it begins with phonemes that we don't know what they mean. because I just think the idea of somebody thinking of that is so unusual, to begin a book with phoneme. And the point of beginning a book with phonemes is it's a rejection of the modern linguistic theory that all of language is based upon meaningless sounds. This is the modern linguistic theory that phonemes are meaningless, and they only become meaningful when coupled. So for instance, da has no meaning, and has no meaning, and ga has no meaning. But if you say dog, it becomes meaningful. So the idea that the base of language is meaningless, well, this is in a sense a refutation of that, because what it's saying is these phonemes have meaning, but you don't know what they are. And there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, a man was moaning, and there's some weakness in the chain, but the meaning is very profound, I think, in this light. A man was moaning, and one of the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, said, "Stop moaning, kuf anka," the moaning. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Don't tell him to do that, because he's calling on a name from the names of God." So the idea of moaning when you're in pain, and that's one of the meanings of awah. In the Quran it says Ibrahim was awah, and the awah is somebody yata'awwah, that they have this moaning or this. So the idea that sounds are meaningful, that sounds are not meaningless. And that's a very interesting reason for the fact that several of the chapters of the Quran begin with these sounds that we don't know what they mean, but we know they have a meaning, because it is impossible for Allah, or rather it is inconceivable that Allah would mention something, put something in the Quran that was meaningless. We don't believe that. So it begins by Alif Lam Mim, Tilka ayatul kitab al-hakim. These are signs from a wise book. These are signs from a wise book. And ayat, we know that signs are in the self and on the horizon. In other words, there are signs outside of you and there are signs inside of you. And what the human being is he is a decoder of signs. That is why we are unique. Animals cannot decode signs. Human beings are capable of seeing symbols and understanding that they're symbolic of something else. So that is what is unique about the human being, is that we are decoders of signs, and every sign signifies something. And the ultimate sign is the universe. This is the big sign, is the universe. Well, what does it signify? The Muslims believe that it signifies that there's no God but Allah. And that's the lesson to be learned from all of these signs, is that this entire universe is alam. The word in Arabic for world is the same word that we get sign from, alam. So alam, the world, is something that is known. Now, who knows the world? Alim, the knower, which is what the human being is capable of doing, of becoming a knower, a Gnostic, somebody who has knowledge as opposed to ignorance. And then it says, Hudan wa rahma, Hudan, guidance, and mercy. And they go together, because guidance is a mercy. Guidance is a mercy. This book has guidance in it. In other words, again, this is the idea of opposites, that you have error and deviation, and you have guidance, huda. And guidance and mercy go together, just as error and the opposite of mercy go together also. Because when you're in deviation, you're in a situation that is painful. And people that deviate other people, in a sense, are doing something that's very harmful to them, which is the opposite of what mercy is, because mercy is riqqa wa i'taf. It's something that occurs in the heart, which is a type of broken. Riqqa is something that indicates that the heart is soft and easily moved. And what mercy is, it's that element in the human being that moves him or her to help somebody else, to alleviate their suffering, to alleviate their struggling. And that's why the most powerful example of mercy is the mercy of a mother to a child. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he gave an example of God's mercy, he used the analogy of the mother and the child. And he said, once they saw a woman was breastfeeding her child, and the Prophet ﷺ said, do you see this child? And the companion said, yes. And he said, do you think she would throw her child into the fire? And they said, she would never do that. And then he said, Allah is more merciful to his servants than that mother with her child. So that's the analogy. Now the other analogy he gave us was that God has 100 parts of mercy with him, and only one he has sent down to the earth. The other 99 he retained in his presence. And that one, he said, is the mercy that from it a mare will not step on her foal. So even a horse, a female horse, a mare, will not put her foot on her foal out of mercy. That's a mercy, and she is inspired to do that. But that's from the mercy of God. So every mercy you see in the world is from the mercy of God. But you should know that all the mercy in the world, since the beginning of time till the end of time, is only one portion of 100 portions, and the other 99 have been reserved for the day of judgment. Right? And that's why Imam Busayri says, لَعَلَّ رَحْمَةَ رَبِّي حِينَ يَقْسِمُهَا تَأْتِي عَلَى حَسَبِ الْعِصْيَانِ فِي الْقِسَمِ. That perhaps the mercy of my Lord, when he distributes it in the next world, comes in accordance with the need of the wrongdoer for the mercy. So the more you need, the more is a portion to you. So it's a hudan wa rahma lil muhsinin, for the people who do good. The book benefits the people of ihsan, and ihsan are the people who are, the opposite of these people are the mufsidun, the people that sow corruption. The people of ihsan are the people that, the word literally means the beauty makers. I mean, if you took a literal meaning, hasuna means beautiful, ahsana means to make beautiful. But the idea there is that in aesthetic theory, beauty is harmony, just as ugliness is disproportionate. In other words, the reason that we like things in proportion, even if you see a face, if you see a face in which there's been a stroke and half of the face is drooping, there's something troublesome looking at a face that's happened to. Because of the lack of proportion. It's the same if one eye is above the other. I mean, these things strike people, or a one-eyed person, or a one-handed person, because there's a loss of proportion. So beauty, in a sense, is the idea of harmony and proportion. And that is what the people of ihsan, they are maintaining balance in the world. They're the people that are keeping things in their proper proportions. So justice is about equal distribution. That's one type of justice. Right? There's other types of justice, but justice is about making sure everyone gets their due proportion. It might not be the same, but it's their due. And then he says, الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ, they establish prayer. And here you have alignment, because the people who pray are aligned with the heavens. So there's an alignment there, because what happens when you sever the alignment of the heavens and the earth, you get disruption in the world. That's the problem. When human beings are aligned with the heaven, there's order. And when they're not aligned with the heavens, there's disorder. And that is why the prayer that we do 5 times a day is in order to align ourselves with a higher order, which is the order of the cosmos, because it's all in proportion and balance. And yuqimuna as-salat, the reason it doesn't say yusallun, those who pray, it says those who establish prayer, is because this is not about the outward form, it's about the inward reality. So people that pray the outward form are not necessarily muqimu salat. They're not establishing the prayer. They're praying, right? But they're not establishing the prayer. The people who establish the prayer are the people that are performing the prayer as it was intended to be performed. So it has to do with the reality of the prayer. وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ, and they give zakat. So here's the personal purification, which is your own soul, and then the social, that what you're doing is your own self is aligned with the heavens, but you're also making sure that what is around you is in order. And the way things get disorderly in human society is when there is economic inequities. I mean, that is the nature of oppression. Wherever you see people that are angry, it's rooted in economic injustice, generally. I mean, that's societal anger. There's other types of anger that have to do with different types of injustice. But out in the world, that's at the root of most people's anger, which is why when the Quran says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ, don't devour your wealth amongst you in vain or unjustly. And then Allah says, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ, unless that it is a type of commerce in which people are in mutual agreement about. In other words, both sides feel good about the transaction. Because when one side feels cheated, then you're setting the situation up for anger. And then it says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, and don't kill each other. In other words, if your commerce is not right, it's going to lead to wars. It's going to lead to economic wars. And if you look historically, most wars are about economics. Even if we look, I know that's a Marxian analysis, but even if we look at the Meccan, the main thing that really troubled the Meccans was their concern about the economic situation that they were in. They were really troubled by the idea of making the gods one, because they thought that if people didn't have gods, they wouldn't come to Mecca and they would lose their commerce. So again, it had to do with this concern about their economic condition. And then it says, وَهُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ, and they have yaqeen, which is certainty about another world. Now, certainty comes from thought and perception. Certainty is not something that, because there are people that can be deluded and think they're certain about something, but that certainty can be shaken. Certainty is the unshakable. And there are 3 levels of certainty according to the Quran. There's ilm al-yaqeen, ayn al-yaqeen, and haqq al-yaqeen. And they're all mentioned in the Quran. The knowledge of certainty, the truth of certainty, the eye of certainty, and then the truth of certainty. Imam al-Ghazali, the example that he gives of these 3 levels of certainty is that the knowledge of certainty is that you've heard from a trustworthy source. That is a certain type of knowledge. So if you know Abdullah, and Abdullah comes to you and says, the mosque is on fire, and you say, really, did you see that? And he says, yes, I just came from there and it's definitely on fire. If you know Abdullah doesn't lie, you're going to believe that. And that's certainty. And then you'll go and say to somebody else, the mosque is on fire. They say, how do you know? Abdullah told me. And Abdullah doesn't lie. Well, that is the certainty that the Prophet ﷺ brought to the people that knew him. When he came, what did he say to the Quraysh? What would you say if I told you there was an army on the other side of this hill ready to attack you? And they said, we would believe you because you're the trustworthy. Then he said, what if I told you I was a messenger from God before the later days to give you news of paradise and a warning of the hellfire? And they didn't believe. So he used an analogy first. He's saying, look, you'll believe me in this. Will you believe me in this? Now, there's certain possibilities there. Delusion, a person can be deluded. A person can be a madman, right? Also, a person can be a charlatan. They might want something out of it. Now, we know that he was not a charlatan because he was offered to be their king, if he would give up that. He was offered that they would marry him the best women. He was offered wealth. All these things, they gave him everything in the world. And what did he say? If you put the sun in my right hand, if you put the moon in my left hand, in other words, if you gave me everything in the universe, not just in the world, but in the universe, I'm not going to stop telling people this message. There's no ulterior motive in this. And we know from Hercules, Heraclius, he's called in history. Heraclius, who was the Roman emperor, when he asked Abu Sufyan, he asked him certain things, but one of them was, were any of his ancestors kings? And he said no. And the reason he asked that is because he wanted to know whether or not he was trying to regain some lost glory. And he also asked whether his followers were from the poor or from the rich. And when he said no, most of them from the poor, he said that's the way the prophets are. And he said, how was he before? Did you know him to tell lies before? And they said no, he never told any lies. In fact, he was called the trustworthy. So he said that he would not lie about God if he didn't lie about lesser things. So then it comes, was he mad? And the Quran says, مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ. You're not, by the blessing of your Lord, you are not mad. Now the thing about mad people is the people around them will know that. I mean, madness is something, it's very difficult to conceal madness. And that's the nature of being mad. And so the fact that the people who were with him before, who were noted for their intelligence, people like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the fact that he was not only the first of the men to believe in him, but he stayed with him until the end of his life. So here's a man who grew up with him, who embraced his religion, and then after that stays with him as his closest companion. I mean, there's a sign for anybody of intellect to know. And even the Quraysh, when they said, what should we say about him? Should we say he's Majnoon? They said he's not, laysa fihi al-jinnah. He doesn't have that type of madness that we see in mad people. See, they knew that they couldn't say that about him, so they didn't. They said, is he a poet? They knew they couldn't say that about him. So they said, this isn't poetry. We know what poetry is, and he's not, this isn't poetry. So what do we say about him? That all they could say was he was a sahir, he was a magician. Because they saw the transformation of people around him. And magic is about transforming things. So they used this, that was the only thing they could say about him. Now, was he deluded? See, this is also another aspect to look at, delusional states. And I think if anybody studied his life fairly, that they would have to admit that he was not deluded. And the Quran also says that he did not have ghurur or delusion. So that is the first level, is that you believe somebody. The second level is you see it for yourself. Abdullah tells you, you believe him, but you want to go see for yourself. You go and see it, and you see the fire. That's called Ayn al-Yaqeen. It's a higher level of certainty. It's not that you doubted Abdullah, but now you see it. And Haqq al-Yaqeen is that you actually touch the fire. So you feel the fire. That's the highest level of certainty. And those are the levels of certainty. Now, the first level of certainty about the next world is ilm al-yaqeen, that we've heard about it. There are other levels. There's ayn al-yaqeen. The Prophet ﷺ had haqq al-yaqeen because he saw it in the prayer. We know that when he moved back and forward, and he said that he saw paradise. But we also know on the Isra and the Mi'raj that he actually entered into and passed through. So he had all three levels. But the least of those levels is a belief in the truth of those who have said. And this is a land that no traveler has returned from traditionally. I mean, that's the way it's been stated. It's a land that no traveler has returned from to tell us about. But that's the difference between the prophets, is that they actually tell us about. Then after that it says, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَى هُدًى مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. These are people that are on guidance from their Lord, and they are also people that have success. This is success. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهُ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. There are those from amongst people who purchase empty talk, vain talk, empty talk, as a way of leading people astray. Now this comes from Nadr ibn al-Harith, was one of the people in Mecca. And he was a trader that used to go, a merchant that used to go to Persia. And when he was in Persia, he could read. He bought this book called Kalila and Dimna, which is a book, it's a book of stories. It's a very interesting book. There's a lot of wisdom in it. But it's a book of stories. And he also bought a book about the kings of Persia. And when people used to go to hear the Prophet ﷺ, he hired some storytellers, and he used to put them on the road, and they would tell these stories. And some of the people that were going to hear the Prophet ﷺ would actually sit and listen to the stories, and they were very fascinating stories, and they got interested in it. But the reason he did it was to prevent them from hearing the truth. And this is the idea of entertainment. I mean, entertainment, see, there's an ancient principle in ruling people. The Romans called it bread and circus. I mean, this was actually part of the Roman political understanding of how you ruled a people, is you gave them bread, but you also gave them entertainment to keep them from thinking about serious things. And that is what this is basically what they were doing. It's entertainment. Television plays this role very well in our society, because what it does is it tells you empty stories. But it distracts you from the fact that you're a temporal creature, that you're passing through time, and that you will leave this world. So instead of doing the real work, you preoccupy yourself with empty tales. And it can go on. They'll just keep churning them out. I mean, that's the thing about it. It'll just go on and on. Then it says, وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا. They take it as mockery. They think this is fun and games. They view revelation, prophecy, they view all this as something foolish and silly, and they make fun of it. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. These people will be humiliated for mocking the signs of God. وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا. If you recite to them some of our signs, they will turn out of arrogance, كَأَن لَّمْ يَسْمَعْهَا, as if they didn't even hear it. In other words, the subject matter is very serious. Even if you don't believe in it, the subject matter is very serious, because it's about life and death, it's about infinity, it's about paradise, it's about punishment, it's about how you live your life. These are very serious issues. Whether you believe in the view or not, it's not something to be taken lightly. The Christians believe it. I mean, they believe in the basic principle. The Jews believe in the basic principles. Even other traditions. I mean, Pure Land Buddhism believes in an afterlife. They believe in salvation. So this idea that what you do in this life determines the outcome of the next life is an important thing. So to just turn away from it out of arrogance and laugh at it and mock it and not give it any consideration is a sign of arrogance, and certainly a sign of unintelligence. It's not a very intelligent response to the subject matter. كَأَنَّ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ وَقْرًا, as if their ears are plugged up. فَبَشِّرْهُ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. So give him glad tidings for his rejection of pain and alienation of the state that results in. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتُ النَّعِيمِ. Surely those who believe and do good actions, they have paradises of na'im. And na'im is everything that is good and positive and pleasurable and desirable. Na'im. And this, some say it's one of the names of there are different names of paradise. Darul Jalal, Darul Salam, Darul Qarar, Jannatul Adan, Jannatul Ma'wa, Jannatul Khuld, Jannatul Firdaus, and Jannatul Na'im. And some say that this is the highest, it's the 8th paradise. Khalidina fiha. Khalid means abiding therein forever. Wa'ad Allah haqqa. This is the promise of Allah in truth. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. And it's important that Hakim here, we have it in the first one. This is Kitab al-Hakim, and he is Aziz al-Hakim. And then, خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ بِغَيْرِ عَمْدٍ تَرَوْنَهَا. He created the heavens without any pillars that you can see. In other words, everything, see, this is gravity, according to some of the modern scholars. everything's being held up because of universal gravity, and you can't see it. It's something that we know now that the heavens have been created with something that we can't see that's holding it all in place. It's not falling on itself. And so some of the modern commentators have said that that's what that amad is. And then it says, وَأَلْقَى فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِكُمْ, and He has thrust in the earth pillars. These supports or pillars, these mountains that Allah has put in order to stabilize the earth, which is also what we know now about mountains, that they're actually stabilizing factors. And what you see outside, it's also described in the Quran as autad, which are like tent pegs. And the thing about a tent peg is the majority of it is in the earth. Only a portion of it, a small portion, is outside of the earth that's holding the tent together. And the mountains, if you look in geology, the mountain is very much like a tent peg. It's a very accurate description. And that's in order to hold this whole thing together so that it quake not with you. In other words, so it doesn't shake. And one of the things about earthquakes is the places that they occur, there's actually a movement, and the mountains are stabilizing factors in it. Like in Los Angeles, because it's a valley, the stabilizing factors there are the mountains. They're actually stabilizing the tectonic plates so that it just didn't completely collapse in itself. And then it says, وَبَثَّ فِيهَا مِن كُلِّ دَابَّةٍ, and He dispersed in it every type of creature. So there's creatures that crawl, creatures that fly, creatures that walk, creatures that swim, creatures that have blood, creatures that don't have blood. I mean, all these type of creatures on the earth, every type of creature. وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَنبَتْنَا فِيهَا مِن كُلِّ زَوْجٍ كَرِيمٍ. And then we sent down from the sky water, and we brought forth beautiful pairs, wonderful pairs. And this is also the idea of, in creation, what you see is that there's pairing. So even in flowers and plants, and you have male and female, you have pairing that's going on. Now, هَذَا خَلْقُ اللَّهِ. After saying all this, Allah said, this is the creation of Allah, of God. فَأَرُونِي مَاذَا خَلَقَ الَّذِينَ مِن دُونِهِ. So show me what other than God has made. After this display of, look at the heavens, it's all being held together. You can't even see what we're holding it together with, right? The four forces, what they call the four forces, these universal forces. And then look at all the creatures, look at yourselves, look at the mountains that are holding this earth together. This is the creation of Allah. So show me, what have those other than God, what have they created? بَلِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Indeed, the oppressors are in such manifest deviation. It's so clear their wrongs, right? In relation to the world, in relation to the harmony of the world. Now, after this, we move to the story. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةِ. We have given Luqman wisdom. He's called Luqman al-Hakim. أَنَشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ. That you should show gratitude to Allah. So this is the wisdom that Luqman was given. The wisdom of gratitude. Being in the world, being in a world that is filled with blessing, and the greatest blessing of all is existence. I mean, the fact that you exist as a conscious being, this is called ni'matul ijad and then ni'matul imdad. The blessing of existence and then the blessing of sustenance for your existence. The fact that you are mutahayyiz, that you exist in place, but you've been given a place to exist in. Allah needs no place to exist. You need a place. So not only has He given you your existence, but because you are in time and you're limited, you need a place to exist in. That in itself is a blessing, and it means you're dependent, because you're dependent on your place. So you are a dependent creature. No matter how independent you think you are, you're dependent on your air. on your food, on your place, on security. I mean, if it gets too cold, you die. If it gets too hot, you die. So all of these things. I mean, who's keeping your body temperature at 98.6? Who's regulating that? I mean, it's a feedback mechanism in the body. You can explain it, but who's doing that? Because it's a self-regulating system. If you just look at the temperature dial here, right? We put that at that level, and then it stays at a certain level. And who built the system, and who all these things? These are analogies. So give thanks unto Allah. I mean, this is the wisdom we gave, that you should give thanks to Allah. وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. And just to remind you, God doesn't need your thanks. I mean, if you do something for your child, you don't need the thanks of that child. Right? But when the child shows you gratitude, does your heart incline towards that child? That's the nature of it. Your heart inclines towards that child. And these are analogies. وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. And whoever covers up, does not show, because kafar is the opposite of shakar. Kafar is the opposite of shakar. Kafar means, I mean, in English we have cover, which is from the same possible cognate of kufr, cover, kafara, cover over. Kefir, there's kefir, they call it here, that yogurt. You make it by covering the yogurt with a cloth, right? That's why it's called kefir. So kafara is to cover over. That is the opposite of gratitude. What is gratitude? To not cover up, to recognize, to admit, to say, look at all these blessings. The covering over is to say, there's no blessings. I'm having a horrible time. And Allah is Ghaniyun Hamid. He's praiseworthy whether you're praising Him or not. It doesn't matter if you're giving Him praise or not. Just like if you look at a glass of water, water satiates whether you drink it or not. It has that attribute. God is praiseworthy whether you praise Him or not. It's irrelevant. His reality is He's Hamid. His reality, He's independent. وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ. When Luqman said to his son, now look at this, إِقَامَ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِتَاءَ الزَّكَاةِ. It began those who established the prayer and then help others. What does Luqman do? The first thing he does, he thanks God. The next thing he does is try to help others. Right? And that's hikmah. You see, it's not just you. I mean, this is the desire to help others. You see, this is what, once you yourself recognize that you've been given this gift, you want to help others. So Luqman rectified himself, and then he set about to help others rectify themselves. So what is it? وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ. And he's giving him wa'd. He's exhorting him. He's reminding him. Because that's one of the best things that you can. Ya bunayya. Now this is, bunayya is a way that you speak to somebody. Bunayya is a tasghir, which is a diminutive in grammar. And in the Arabic language, they do it in Spanish as well. If you want to speak to somebody in a term of endearment, right? Then sometimes you use the diminutive. Like instead of saying Hamza, you'd say Hamzita. Like as a way of trying to win the heart of that person. So here, this is what he's doing. Ya bunayya, oh my little child. And this is a term of endearment. And the reason for this is that when you speak to people, you have to win them over before they listen to you. And the Prophet ﷺ, his sunnah is filled with examples of speaking to people in a way that wins their heart over to him. And that's why he never returned a wrong with a wrong. If somebody raised their voice, he lowered his voice. If somebody was harsh with him, he was gentle with him. Because you don't fight fire with fire. So this is a way, ya bunayya. Now what's he say to him? La tushrik billah. Don't associate with God. This is the most important thing to know in the world. Because why? إن الله يغفر لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء. Allah will not forgive association with Him, but He'll forgive everything other than that to whomever He pleases. Now that is shirk after knowledge. Because Allah says, لا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون. Don't set up idols beside Allah once you know that God is one. So people, and this from the mercy of God, is that before people are told that God is one, they're forgiven. And that's the belief of the Muslims. Ahl al-Fatra, we believe the dominant opinion, and it's the sound opinion, is that the people, the mushrikun, who were worshipping idols before the Prophet ﷺ came on the Arabian Peninsula, they're not taken into account for that because they didn't know. But once you know, don't do it. And this is why He's telling His son, don't do it. Inna shirka la dhulmun azim. This is a great wrong to associate with God, because it leads to, see, if your understanding is distorted, your actions will be distorted. This is the nature of understanding. Understanding, if you look in engineering, if the building is not coming out right, it's because of the plans. You have to go back to the plans. Either you're not following them correctly, so there's some misunderstanding, or they weren't set up right. So you always have to look at your understanding. If the methodology is not working, you have to look at your understanding. Is there a flaw in the understanding? Because flaws in understanding lead to flaws in behavior. And the worst flaw in understanding is your understanding of God. Because if you don't know that God is merciful, then how will you show mercy? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, show mercy, and the merciful will show mercy to you. If you want mercy of God, then you should show mercy to others. Your understanding is going to determine how you behave in the world. And that's why this is so important. And then, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. Now this is, we have the discourse of Luqman to his son, but now Allah is interjecting. I mean, this is all from God, the revelation, but now He's interjecting between the words. It's going to go back to Luqman, but now He's telling us why. And this is related to our topic. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. We have enjoined upon the human being concerning his parents. Right? So this is a wasiyah from Allah concerning your parents. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ. Now it says the two parents, but then it goes to the mother because the mother is more important than the father. And that's a fact. The mother is more important than the father. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ. The mother bore the child, sapped and weakened. I mean, this was a draining experience. So this is reminding the reason that you have been told to take care of your parents, to honor your parents, is look what your parents did for you to bring you into the world. That is enough. Just the fact that your mother for 9 months suffered. 9 months is a long time. And it was a difficult period of time. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ. And then it took 2 years just to get you to where you could actually have some independence. I mean, for the first 2 years, it's total dependence. The dependence will last almost 12 years. I mean, we have a longer dependency period than any other creatures out there. I mean, whales have a reasonably long time, but it's nothing in relation to human beings. I mean, 12 years, it takes a long time for a child to become independent of his caretakers or her caretakers. So here, فِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنَشْكُرْ لِي. Give thanks unto me. So this is also reason to thank Allah, because He's the one that did this. I mean, your parents are a means. So thank the means, but don't forget the real cause, which is God. And God is the one that put that compassion in your mother or in your father to take care of you. And then it says, أَنَشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ. This is very interesting because it's saying not just me to show gratitude to me, but also to your two parents. So you have to show gratitude for the cause, but also the means by which you achieve that cause. And this is part of what the world is about. It's thanking Allah and then thanking the world as an opportunity to draw near to your Lord. I mean, that in itself, once you see that, in other words, zakat, praying is thanking Allah. Zakat is thanking people for giving you the ability to thank Allah. So the world is an arena for showing gratitude. If you have wealth, how do you show gratitude for that wealth? By spreading it around. So the whole world is this arena for gratitude, and that's what we're being told. Show gratitude to Allah, but then show it to those sources in the world from which good has been given you. And the first and foremost is your parents. You have to show gratitude. Now, the interesting thing about this is that parents can be a tribulation. In other words, the parent doesn't always fulfill the obligations, the responsibilities. Does that mean we relinquish the right of the parent? This is one of the really interesting things about the modern world, is that the demand for rights and the neglect of responsibilities. This is really at the essence of the modern world. The modern world is a world in which responsibilities are sidelined and the focus is on rights. Everybody wants their rights. Human rights, civil rights, parental rights, children's rights. Everybody's clamoring for their rights.
This completes CD number 3.